I sometimes get questions from the electric eel wheel community, so I thought I'd take some time and answer a few of those questions today. So the first question is, what is your background and how did you start your e-spinner business? I guess a little background is that I graduated from college with a degree in computer engineering around 2000, and then I moved out to the East Coast near Boston to get a job at a tech company. And I basically worked in computer graphics, designing hardware and doing very low-level software for about 15 years. I got pretty good, and I moved up sort of the engineering ladder during that time. I actually never quit, but I worked for 3 different companies. Basically, my companies kept getting bought by bigger and bigger companies. So I did work for 3 different companies, but I never ended up quitting, which is somewhat unique, I think. It was great working. I did really enjoy those jobs. I was surrounded by super smart people, and it was just, it was fun working there. But I just think eventually I was looking for something a little bit different, and I started experimenting on the side with my side business around 2009. It was just a sort of a hobby in the beginning. I called it Dreaming Robots. I was just looking for new challenges, and running my own business definitely has offered those. It requires a very different level of expertise than working at a big tech company. And I've really enjoyed both. Overall, I do think that running my own business is a little bit better. I really like having full control over how my products are designed and used from initial conception all the way through sales. Like that was something when you're working at a company with 30,000 people, you're just one little piece, and you can really get good at that little piece, but it's kind of fun having this broad perspective after becoming a specialist and sort of being able to contrast those 2 different work experiences. Another question I get asked sometimes is, why did you name your business Dreaming Robots? So back when I was looking for a name for my business, I had a primary requirement, and that was that I could get the .com domain website name for whatever I chose. And that eliminated a lot of things, but I was just trying to put together 2 easy to spell words, and I've always liked robotics. So that's something that, the word robot has a lot of different terms, and, some people think of the robot, in the movies that's kind of human-like and does all the tasks of humans, but there's also other meanings where it just is a fairly sophisticated machine that helps automate some process. And I guess when I use the word robots here, I'm kind of thinking, it's just a machine that automates some kind of process. So, using that kind of definition, your washing machine is a robot. And the spinning wheels that I make are also robots. They're just automating things. They oftentimes have computers in them. And that's true for the electric eel wheels. And then dreaming was just a whimsical word that kind of gives me, at least for me, it kind of gives a fun way of thinking about robots. Like, what happens when robots dream? That sort of thing. That was like over 10 years ago. And I've learned a lot about, neural networks and deep learning algorithms since then. And now there's actually more questions about, thinking machines, and that kind of evolves into dreams. But that didn't actually factor into my thought process on picking the word, dreaming for it. Although it's a fun angle. I think it just sounds good too, right? Dreaming Robots. It's kind of a cool name. So I went with it, and I'm not one to spend a lot of energy trying to rename things. I often ask polls about what people want to name projects that I'm working on, and I just go with what the community wants. In this case, I didn't have a bunch of people following me at the time, so I didn't run a bunch of different names. I had a list of names. I don't even remember what the other options were, but the one I ended up choosing was Dreaming Robots. I probably spent a few hours kind of coming up with that name, and it ended up sticking and becoming a big part of my life. But, as an engineer, I make lots of decisions, and I try not to spend a ton of time on the ones that aren't that important. And I don't think like naming things is like super important, at least at the levels of products that I'm selling. I know that names do mean a little bit more at the high end of when you're selling huge numbers of them. But I think for mine, sort of the product speaks more, and you just need to have a name that people can recognize and look up websites and that sort of thing. The next question is, could you give a little history on your electric eel wheel products? So the first version was around 2010, and I believe I made exactly one of those. That was one I made for my wife because she wanted an e-spinner, and the ones that were on the market at that time were like over $1,000, and it just seemed like a fun project for me to do. So I made one for my wife, and then she took it to her knitting night, and several of her friends wanted one. So I then made a second version that was a little easier to manufacture, and I made several of those for her friends. I sold a few online, I think, of version 2. I can't remember for sure. Version 3 then was a pretty radical change that sort of made it less expensive and easier again to manufacture. And basically from then on, I've done probably like 10 or so versions of spinning wheels and countless prototypes. And each version I try to make a little bit better. And on every version, I keep making more of them. So, in the beginning, I was making one, and then maybe a batch of 10, and then a batch of 100. And things really took off when I started making the electric eel wheel mini or nano. So that was the first time I did something that was a new form factor. There's nobody else making these really small, really affordable e-spinners. So that was kind of something that really took off and was one of the reasons I decided I could, quit my job in tech and come and do this full time. It was because lots of people were all of a sudden interested in these littler wheels and nobody else were making them. So that kind of made a name for me. I mean, the Kickstarter for the electric eel wheel nano sold over 5,000 of those spinning wheels. So at that point, I was making batches of thousands of them at a time, which really helps keep the price down. And because it was smaller, it was also less expensive. I also designed it to be affordable. So it was a pretty interesting niche market. And while I haven't started shipping the electric eel wheel 6, the feedback from my beta tester so far is that the electric eel wheel 6 is sort of really a very interesting product. It's sort of way better than my previous large form factor e-spinners. And it's better at certain things, a lot of things, than any other e-spinners on the market that these people have tried. So I'm really hopeful that the electric eel wheel 6 will sort of do for the bigger e-spinner what the electric eel wheel nano did for this new form factor that I had created. With the big community that I have now, I have tons of feedback on new features people would like. So I have more things to work on than I can possibly do, but that's a good problem to have. And the next question is, how do you price your products? So a little background here is useful. There's really two major ways that businesses price products. The first is to calculate how much the product costs to make, add a margin so that they're making enough money to stay in business, and then that's sort of what they sell it for. The second is what most companies want to be able to do, and this is where there's less competition or your brand stands out, something like that. And that's where you look at how much value your product gives to a customer, and then you can charge that. And then this amount is going to be higher than just sort of what is necessary to stay in business. So those are the two major ways, and I generally try to go with the first one, where I just look at the cost of the product and then figure out how much I need to charge to sort of be able to pay all of my contractors and all of my other bills and make sure that my family can live comfortably. That's kind of what I try to do. So with that said, I can't really give you an exact formula. There have been companies that say you need to charge at least 2x the cost to make the product. There's been some people who've said you need to charge at least 1.6x. There's been companies that say you need to charge a lot more than that. I don't have an exact number. I do typically try to target between 2 and 4x the cost to make the product. Now that's the cost to make the actual product. It doesn't account for any of the other overheads. And I'll sort of explain how this works. Maybe let's start off with an example. So let's say I'm making 1,000 spinning wheels, and just to keep the numbers easy, let's say each one costs $30 to make. And that would be, to make 1,000 of them, that would be $30,000. Let's also say, now, like if you wanted to say, oh, let's do 2x the cost of the product. So all of a sudden, after I've sold those, I would have $60,000, and you'd be like, oh, that's pretty good. You made $30,000. However, because of how I make my products, there's a lot of tooling costs that go into it. There's a lot of prototyping, and buying the prototype parts is expensive. So let's say all of the tooling and the prototyping costs another $30,000. So that's sort of an upfront cost that I have to pay before, that's the cost to make the very first one. So now I've paid that upfront $30,000 and the $30,000 to make them. Now I'm at $60,000. So if I think I'm, pretty confident I can sell at least 1,000 of them, I probably wouldn't set my multiply, I wouldn't charge just 2x the cost to make them. The cost to make them is the 30,000. So 2x that is 60,000. That's, I'm just breaking even if I only sell 1,000. So I'd probably use maybe, let's say 3x. So then I'd sell them for 90,000. On the first 1,000, I am potentially pocketing $30,000 because you'd sell them for 90,000. You'd subtract the 30,000 for making them and the 30,000 for upfront costs to develop the product. So, 30,000, if it's something that took me 6 months or more to design, is not a very good return on investment for an engineer. But my hope is that I would sell more. And I try to generally guess at how many I'm going to make and then base the price sort of on that. So that's kind of how the pricing works. In this example, it does not take into account all these other expenses that I have for a small business. Luckily, my wife has health insurance, so I don't have to cover health insurance for me. I do have to pay for my warehouse, for insurance, contractors, utilities, taxes, credit card processing fees, shipping costs, return products. There's just a ton of expenses that I incur that come out of sort of that profit that I was computing. So that's kind of how I end up pricing my products. It's pretty important to spend a little bit of time to come up with a price, or else a business isn't going to stay in business. But in general, I really do like a lot of people to have my products, and I believe that a lower price will allow more people to have my products. So if I can, I'm going to price my product pretty low so that a lot of people can buy it. And then I feel good because a lot of people are using my products. And when I sell a lot, I don't have to make very much money per spinning wheel. So that's how my model works and how I try to keep my prices low. Now, the last question is probably the one that is most interesting to a lot of people. What products do you have planned for the future? So now I've mentioned some of these in the past, but I'll add some additional details here. The next product that's likely to be released is one that I've done several videos on. It's called the Yarn Counter. It measures the length of yarn in meters or in yards. It's got a bunch of other features like beeping when you reach certain lengths, and nice low friction and good yarn handling and things. So that's something that's pretty far along in development. I'm currently having some beta testers throw a bunch of different yarn at it and getting feedback from the community on additional improvements that I can make. But I'm personally pretty happy with the design, and now I'm just adjusting it to make it even better at this stage. But hopefully that won't take too much longer, and at some point I'll launch another Kickstarter for that project based on a poll I recently released. People definitely wanted to see a Kickstarter for this project. So the reason I decided to do a yarn counter was there are a few on the market right now, but they're all mechanical, which is limits the functionality, and it allows me, with my computer engineering background, to do an electrical version, which brings a lot of more advanced features. Also, they are generally either pretty low quality or they're pretty expensive. So I'm kind of targeting a medium price that's got more features and works as well as the expensive higher end yarn counters on the market right now. Another product I've talked a lot about and is hopefully going to get released is a cone winder. So that's one that I'm still working on the design. I've shown some videos and I'm not completely happy with it yet. I need to continue working on it. I've got several more prototypes since my last video built, and I've tested them, and I'm going to continue iterating, and I'll do another video hopefully when I've got a design I'm more happy with. It's changed quite a lot since the last video as I've tried to improve. Basically, I've been working on how the cone goes onto the winder so that it can accommodate more cones, and it's held in place a little bit better than it was with the prototype. So that's the thing that I've been changing a lot on the recent prototype. In general, I'm not worried about the software or the electronics. Those are things that I'm pretty competent at this point. It's more about coming up with the ideas for the mechanical, physical design. And I use a 3D printer to do a lot of rapid prototyping. And then generally I move on to injection molded parts for the final version after I've perfected the design using 3D printing and rapid prototyping. Another thing I've been working on a lot lately are circular sock knitting machines. I've posted several videos where I've been restoring one, and that's really caught my interest of late. So when I have extra time, I'm kind of thinking about how I could affect that market and potentially do a product there. And I've really got two ideas. Both of them involve a mix of metal parts and plastic parts. And the idea is to try to make a lower cost circular knitting machines. So the two ideas I have right now are to either do a 3D printed version, and I would sell just the non 3D printed parts, or maybe I'd sell 3D printed parts if I can find a partner to do the 3D printing for me. I don't intend to do large volumes of 3D printing myself. That's not an area I want to get into, but I could look into that. However, I do have some concerns. I still have to test more things, but I have some concerns that I'm not going to be happy with the results of that. And if I'm not happy with how the 3D printed parts come out, that means that I would have to move to injection molded parts, which I'm pretty confident would work well here for these types of machines. The problem is that these machines are kind of big, and that means that making the molds for them are expensive. So I would need to be able to get a reasonable feel if I go that direction to be sure that the market's big enough to justify the upfront costs for all of the different molds and things. So I'm kind of toying around with those ideas, and I'm developing the CAD files that can be 3D printed so I can start testing different things. I'll probably talk about that in a future video and show what I have at some point. Yeah. And maybe I'd end up doing both of those. Maybe I'd do the 3D printed one first and sort of evaluate, get more experience with exactly how people react to the 3D printed one. And then I could go to an injection molded one, which would reduce the cost to make it and also result in higher quality. But again, I need to be pretty sure that there's going to be a lot of people willing to buy it because the upfront cost for injection molded parts is quite high. Overall, I mean, this one's very much up in the air at this point. It's further out, and I haven't really decided exactly what I'm doing, but it is something I'm going to spend some time researching, and I'm sure I'll talk again about it in some future video. And there are, of course, many ideas that people keep giving me for my e-spinners, both the smaller electric eel wheel nano and the bigger ones. One of the most requested features is a level winding system, something that will put the yarn evenly on a bobbin without you having to move the hook. So that's something I've been working on, and I've posted a few videos, but I'm not completely happy with any of my designs yet, and I'll continue working on that. If I could come up with a solution for that, that is something that I would be very interested in releasing. But I have a lot of other ideas for e-spinners too. So I'm not actively working on any of these e-spinner improvements. I kind of want to experiment with other tools for the fiber community, but I'm sure at some point I'll come back to e-spinners and work on some of these ideas that I have. I think that's all the ideas that I want to share today. So in general, I try to share ideas that are a bit further along. If I share every idea that I come up with, I think it would overwhelm the community, or at the very least, it would overwhelm me, because I try to answer questions people have and collect feedback. So that's kind of where I see the future going. There's definitely more projects. If I finish these, I have a list of probably like 20 more ideas. It's going to keep me busy for a while. Thanks for asking these questions, and hopefully you found these answers interesting. If you've watched the video all the way to the end, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, and thanks for watching. And as always, if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them there, or maybe I'll do another video with Q&A.